All right, welcome everybody to today's CI Live session, Building Battle Cards that Accelerate Adoption. Super excited to have some awesome speakers today with us. We're going to dig into all things battle cards, creating them, getting people to actually use them, updating them. Like I said, all sorts of nitty-gritty into battle cards today. So really excited for everyone that is joining us. My name is Sheila Lehar. I'm the Senior Director of Content Marketing here at Crayon, a competitive intelligence provider. And yeah, we're gonna jump in and get started. My guests today are Spencer Hong, who's the Senior Competitive Intelligence Analyst at Alteryx. I also have Garrett Denney, who's the Vice President of Product Marketing here at Crayon. Previously, he was actually a customer of Crayon at a few organizations like JAM. So he's speaking some great experience on the product marketing side. And then just a few housekeeping items before we dive in. Today's session will be recorded. So if you signed up, you'll get a recording via email that will come today or tomorrow. So if you've got to bounce, no worries. The session, like I said, is recorded. And we want to keep this really interactive. So if you have questions throughout, please just pop them into the Q&A chat on the Zoom, and we'll pause frequently, take questions, read comments, all that good stuff. So again, want to keep this as interactive as possible with today's speakers. All right, so before we jump into all the great content, I just want to learn a little bit more about our presenters today. So in 60 seconds or less, just curious how you both got started in competitive intelligence, not a field that most people think they're going to enter when they're maybe 5 years old and get asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? So Spencer, we'll start with you. How did you get started in CI?
Yeah, absolutely, Sheila. After graduating with my MBA, I actually joined a B2B software company directly into the competitive intelligence realm. As you pointed out before, going into this function, I honestly didn't know much about competitive intelligence besides what we see from TV with the CIA. I can confidently say I'm not working for the CIA, but competitive intelligence is a very fun and exciting function to be in currently.
Awesome. And how about you, Garrett?
Yeah, not too far off from Spencer's talk track. Fell into it a bit by accident at a company that was, growing and scaling. We had a lot of internal pages hosted on Confluence that just frankly got to the point that they weren't useful, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today. But we kind of needed a way to make that more useful for the revenue team. So that was really the core pain point. And from that grew out this whole kind of compete practice, learning best practices, diving in with Crayon as a partner. So yeah, that was my first, I think, toe dipped in the water.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, before we jump into all the great content, we're going to do a quick poll. So we're going to ask everybody, what's your biggest battle card headache today? Is it keeping battle cards up to date, getting your revenue teams to find and use your battle cards, determining what to include on the actual battle cards themselves, measuring the usage of your battle cards, or are you you're good to go, you're headache free? And if you're headache free, I'm not sure why you're here, but we'll see what everyone says. I'll give you maybe like a second or two to take that. Cool, let's see what we got here. All right, so we got 31%, just keeping those battle cards up to date is troubling. Getting our revenue teams to use them at 20%, determining what to include on the battle cards, 37, measuring at 9, and there's a few that are headache free. So kind of all over the place in terms of the headaches that people are having when it comes to their battle cards. So we're going to jump in and get started. I'm curious, I'm going to kick things off with you, Garrett, and this can be from either your Crayon experience, and you're only a few months in here, or your experience at other companies. I'm curious to know, sort of, when it comes down to just the nitty gritty, who are you creating battle cards for? How many are you maintaining, and where do you keep them? Where do they live?
Yeah, really good question here to kick us off. And I'll say a couple of things. The first thing I'll say is to the couple of people that said they're headache free, like, you're a panelist next time. You've been voluntold. You're going to join me and Spencer, because I think we can all learn from you. That sounds like a wonderful paradise to live in, to be headache free. So I think most commonly when you think about battle cards and like why you're investing marketing energy, resources, time into that as a deliverable, you need to kind of ask, who is the consumer and what does it do for the business, right? So most commonly the easy answer is revenue team. You need a way to equip your revenue team to win more and keep more customers. But I think if you take a step back and again, to that poll question, like what are you including on this to achieve that goal? That answer varies wildly. And so if you're an early stage company that's growing and scaling, the answer might be we're not going to include very much at all. It needs to be very streamlined and very easy because the team doesn't know how to use this tool yet. If you're more mature, growth, is kind of maybe something you've been doing for a while, you're more enterprisey or approaching enterprise mid-market, then I think it's a little more nuanced and complex because the team already has a bunch of things they do day to day to win business. And so they might have stuff they do rely on that they want to pull into that battle card that they're looking, elsewhere. It could be on a Google Drive, on a Confluence portal, whatever. So you need to address that current workflow in a way that's a little more streamlined and easier to use. But I think it still comes back to what are we trying to accomplish for the business?
Got it. And then Spencer at Alteryx, what are you doing? Who are you creating battle cards for? And then where do they live? And just roughly like how many battle cards are you maintaining right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone at Alteryx, similar to like my background, our software is analytics for all. We think at Alteryx, competitive intelligence should be for anyone and everyone at Alteryx, especially anyone that is customer facing. So our battle cards are accessible by anyone internally. And then in terms of how we prioritize what battle cards we update and maintain, we speak to our sellers, we identify who are they coming up against most frequently. And we do this worldwide because geographically our sellers compete against different competitors, whether that's in a specific vertical or geographical region. And then what we include in our battle cards, I think Garrett made a great point. It kind of depends on your competitive maturity level at your organization. But we also do have touch points on a monthly and quarterly basis with our sales leadership to better identify what are they hoping to get in our competitive content? Are there items missing or things that they want more of? So we're constantly reinforcing that feedback loop with our go-to-market and sellers to identify what they love, what they potentially don't like in our battle cards so that we can fine-tune it to best equip them when they're out in the field.
Great. And then spoiler alert, I think I know this answer, but like, where are you storing all your battle cards for your teams, your global teams to access them?
Yeah, absolutely. So a while back, they were, those static 2 to 3 page PDF battle cards that really made it difficult to maintain and update. Now, obviously, since we're speaking with Crayon, our battle cards are hosted and housed on the Crayon platform, which does make it a lot easier for our teams to access and maintain and update throughout the life cycle.
Awesome. So both of you mentioned prioritization a little bit, which I think comes up frequently with competitive teams where, they're trying to maintain maybe too many battle cards and prioritization gets tough. And you don't want to be probably maintaining, 200 battle cards and then also trying to do all the other things you have to do in your job. So Garrett, I'm, curious to hear from you as you have some experience in this. How do you maintain, the right amount of battle cards where you're maybe getting a lot of requests from different teams that you're supporting? How do you, maybe keep that at bay so that you're just having, the battle cards that you need and you're not creating a battle card for every single competitor that pops up?
Yeah, for sure. And Sheila, you mentioned this earlier, but I was a customer of Crayons for years before I joined the team. So I know this pain really well. When you ask a product marketer, or a CI owner, what keeps you up at night? I think this is probably one of the top 5 things that comes to mind is like, how do you decide who's tier 1, who you really invest time and resource into tracking, and who you just kind of keep as tribal knowledge in the background somewhere else in the company? This is challenging for different types of customers, different types of users. I think when people first step into CI, the initial gut response from a lot of different parts of the org, especially higher up on the executive level or the revenue side, is we're going to track everything. We have a revenue team that's aware of a whole bunch of competitors. Holy smokes, we need a way to centralize that and to get some data about who we're competing against and how frequently. I think on the flip side, if you're more mature, more mid-market and above, enterprisey, in that world, you're a bigger company and a bigger footprint of that organization. So you're coming to the same pain point, but from a different route. We just compete on a global scale in different regions around the world. We have lots of competitors that we're aware of. And it's not because we're new and kind of lacking data and afraid. It's because we're big and mature and we just have lots of logos that we're kind of bumping into. I think in both of those scenarios, it is really critical that you own the alignment. And there's really nobody else. There's no cavalry coming over the hill to solve this problem for you. You as the PMM or CI owner, you've got to take this under your wing, excuse me, and just get this done. And it's kind of getting in a room with your head of marketing, your head of revenue, maybe sales enablement, maybe another executive stakeholder from like strategy if you've got that function, and saying, what do we really care about? What do we want the revenue team to think about and to give energy to on a week-to-week basis? That informs who you track. Because if the answer is 50 or 100 logos, it's impossible. It's never going to happen. But if the answer is we're losing primarily to a top 5 or a top 10, you can solve for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Spencer, do you have anything to add there in terms of what you've been doing with your team at Alteryx to make sure you guys are pretty focused with your battle card program?
Yeah, we like to think we're pretty data driven. So to back up what Garrett was saying, we use our Salesforce data to identify who our sellers are coming up against most frequently. But then we also, as we get those ad hoc sales requests from our sellers, whether that's in Teams or email or Salesforce chatter, we also catalog all of those requests. And then on a monthly and quarterly basis, we review who we've been coming up against most frequently, and then fine tune that roadmap for the rest of the year to make sure that those respective battle cards that the sellers are going to need the most are the most up to date.
Awesome. Data driven sounds like a good plan. We're going to jump into some sort of do's and don'ts when it comes to battle cards. Spencer, I'm going to start with you. What are some maybe things you've learned in terms of the do's and don'ts about creating the battle cards themselves to make sure they get read? That can be down to format or what sort of worked for you. So creating those battle cards, and then also in sharing them out to the team, what's kind of worked well or maybe not so well for you as you've embarked on your battle card journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So we go out and look into the market of what are the best templates out there for battle cards. And then we have built out and filled out those templates. And then we actually test run different versions of those battle cards with pilot test groups of our sellers to get their feedback. Because our team thinks that certain piece of information is the most helpful for the sellers, actually getting their viewpoint of, no, actually, Spencer, this component of the battle card is more helpful. If you could bring it up closer to the top where we can access it, that would be great. And then, as I mentioned, one of the big do's, or I guess don'ts, depending on how you look at it, is we make our battle cards accessible by everyone and everyone. So that's not just our sellers, it's also our customer success managers, because they're speaking with our closest accounts on a daily basis. So it's important for them to have that competitive intelligence as well. So it's constantly getting that feedback loop with the actual users of our battle cards, fine-tuning it, and being comfortable and understanding that just because we've built a battle card to look a certain way doesn't mean it's the most efficient way for the people that we want to consume those battle cards.
Awesome. Yeah. And I love that, making them accessible to everyone. Like you mentioned, the customer success team. That's a great example where, they're coming up against maybe some tough conversations where they're trying to retain, the customers. And so they need competitive intelligence at that point if the company's looking at somebody else. I love that. Garrett, what about you? Anything you can share in terms of do's and don'ts in the battle card themselves, and then also in the sharing of the battle cards?
Yeah, for sure. And Spencer, just a huge +1 to what you said about A/B testing. I think that's a really mature thing that your company is doing. This is what I love about like the Alteryx model is you view it as we're founded on data and then you test it to see if it proves out. That's something we can all learn from. And I think especially product marketers, like we're always looking for ways to validate. So here's what I would say. I think from the highest level, you as the CI owner or the product marketer need to make a decision up front when you are changing or building a battle card. And that decision is when I roll this out, likely to the revenue team or to whoever it's for, my stakeholder group, am I asking or am I telling? And I think you have different drivers for different answers to that question. If you are asking, it's solving for a pain point like we're kind of dissatisfied with the current asset or it's not working. We can see in the data that we're losing too much to competitors. And you have a sales team that's relatively engaged, relatively mature, and has pretty specific ideas about what could solve that problem. That's when you ask and you say, to Spencer's point, let's get an A/B test going. Let's do a focus group. Let's talk to sales leadership and join their call and just gather some data because they already know what they want to solve the thing. And then if you see it prove out in your win rates, that's awesome. On the flip side, if you have a team that's really new to CI or that's just new in general, you've got a younger sales team that hasn't been through this kind of a mature growth process before, then you're more on the telling side of that path. And you really kind of need to step in as this experienced practitioner and say, look, best practice in the market to achieve a higher win rate versus this competitor is to adopt a battle card like this. And the expectation is you'll be viewing that every week, once or twice a week, or before your critical sales calls where you know it's competitive. So you're kind of shifting the tone and saying, you know, we're the owner of CI. We have data from the market and from Crayon, from the State of Competitive Intelligence report that backs this up. And we're going to do this as a combined CI, compete, and revenue team. So you're kind of framing it in a different way. I think for me, that took a while to really sink in. And you can quickly become an order taker as a CI owner or product marketer when in some situations, they're looking for leadership and you need to step in and be that leader.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love what you're saying about, know your sales team really well. That's a big key here. Make sure you're talking to them a ton because that feedback is going to help you make your program better, but also make your battle cards better. I'm going to take a pause here because I think we've got some questions in the chat, and I've got Connor Bond, who's my colleague and content marketing expert. Let me get some questions from you, Connor.
Yeah, so let's say you, using the great advice that you guys shared a few minutes ago, you decide, okay, we're going to build a battle card for this competitor. We have an anonymous attendee who wants sort of the step-by-step process from there. Once you've decided this, we need a battle card for this competitor, what are the first few steps you're taking to start to collect that intel and put the battle card together?
Yeah, I can take this one. If it's a new competitor that we don't have any content on, we leverage multiple different sources. First, we use the customer review data, whether that's on Gartner Peer Insights, Trust Radius, G2 Crowd, to get actual anecdotal customer information. We obviously go to that competitor or that vendor's website to identify what are the products that they sell to the market, what are the overlapping capabilities that we might encounter with the customer. And then we also use paid analyst research, whether that's Gartner or IDC, to get some more of that analyst point of view. So those are the three initial sources that we use. And then internally, if I know that there's a former user of that product that's recently joined our company, I'll get their point of views on it, and then we'll draft a battle card, position it with the seller, get their feedback, and then if they have used the battle card with the customer, get their feedback of how that went, and if there's any loopholes or gaps within the battle card that the seller would appreciate.
Anything you would add to that, Garrett?
No, I love that point. And Spencer, I think you did a really great job of showing like new competitor versus existing competitor, new employee, somebody that's joining the team versus someone that's been around and competed against somebody. The one thing I'll add here is that I think a lot of times we are caught in this crazy cycle of firefighting for our revenue teams. And a lot of that comes out of new logo pops up. we were in a competitive deal or a couple of competitive deals. And that's pretty scary for a seller, for an organization, right? Especially if they came out of nowhere, or they're venture backed, they're growing fast, or they're attached to a partner that's a bigger logo in the space. All of those things make people really pause and take a step back and go, where did this, logo come from? Should I be afraid of them? What do I do? And I think it's kind of a deer in the headlights moment. You should feel empowered to be that voice that calms everybody down and that is a leader in those competitive conversations. So to Spencer's point, when that logo pops up, and you've got that firefighter hat on because everybody's looking around saying, I need. It could be battle card, sales sheet, deck, leave behind, whatever. All of those asks come from a common cause. And the root cause is usually no clarity on how to respond effectively. So step into that, lean into that. And if it's a conversation with the rep that saw it or sales leadership, I think you have a huge opportunity as the owner here excuse me, to level up how the organization thinks of you. And again, continue to earn a seat at the executive table because you've got the data that can show whether it's working or not. So lean in.
Awesome. And I think I have an idea for maybe branded firefighter hats for everyone that's in competitive intelligence. What's another great question that's come through, Connor?
Yeah, so we have another one from an anonymous attendee that I'm gonna ask, and then I'm gonna tack on to as well. So message received, got to get feedback from sales. One of our attendees is wondering, how do you get that feedback? Do you send out surveys? Do you regularly join their team meetings? Do you have ad hoc meetings? So that's the first part. And then what I'm going to add on to that is, how do you decide which members of the sales team to ask for feedback to include in that test pilot group? So sort of a two-part there.
Yeah, so great question. We initially penciled the idea of doing a survey. However, if any of you, if any of your email boxes are similar to mine, it seems like you get a survey emailed to you every day from some random person. And our sellers are inundated with emails every day. So we actually didn't go down the survey route. What we did was we joined the monthly or quarterly QBR sales calls that the sellers were already joining. Because we didn't want to put another meeting on their calendar, because at the end of the day, time is money for them, and we don't want to take time away from their customers. So we, started small. We joined 1 or 2 sales leadership calls in North America, and then slowly expanded that out to EMEA and APJ as well. So we already joined the cadence calls that the sellers were scheduled on their calendars, and then we would just anecdotally ask them, hey, what are the pain points in your sales engagements when it comes to competitive intelligence? And we really just listened to them. And then we didn't just do this once, as I mentioned, we do it on a quarterly basis, and we try to get in front of as many different sellers as possible, because every different seller has a different viewpoint, and they all have some type of really helpful, critical information that we can use to better enhance our competitive content.
Spencer, you're firing off a lot of thoughts in my brain right now. I think the way you talk about how you segment the revenue team and think about serving different personas or segments within that team is really important here. And so if you have a small, tight group, it might be pretty homogenous. You might say, we have a selling team that's 5 people, and those 5 can be served in the same way because we're kind of all facing the same problem. If it's 500 and you're spread around the world across different geos, very different problem. And so I think it's really important to be in alignment with your sales enablement team, if you have one, and your revenue leadership, which you almost certainly have, everybody on this call. So I would start there and say, what's important to you to achieve your number or numbers for this year? Work backwards and think about that matrix that you could build if it's certain geographies overlapping with rep maturity or rep like their space in the market. I had reps in the past that were focused almost exclusively on enterprise business that had been around for 10, 20 years. They knew what they were doing, and they really needed a light touch a couple of times a year to kind of get them up to speed on big changes they should know about. Very different from a brand new rep, fresh out of college, first time selling in our B2B SaaS at the time space. Very different enablement effort as well. So I think the way you talk about battle cards is inherently different between those groups. And then you think about a global org. Then you think about multiple products. It just has to change depending on the audience. So Spencer, big +1.
Yeah. And then if I can just add one last thing,
Yeah.
obviously, since we use Crayon, we get those insights of who our power users are. So I can actually go out and identify the 10 to 30 heavy users of our platform and go out and query them to understand what they love or don't love about the platform and the content that we curate for them.
Awesome. I love that. So you've got sort of a team that you've assembled, and they're kind of maybe like the go-to initially, and because they've demonstrated that they're using the materials. Is that sort of how you worked it out?
Yeah, we actually call it our dream team of Crayon power users. It's 20 to 30 sellers, sales engineers, customer success managers. So they're usually the first stop that I go to whenever we're about to deploy some type of new asset throughout the org.
Spencer, I love dream. We need everybody on this call to have a dream team after joining us. That's really cool. I love that.
Yeah, and when it comes, I guess, to the dream team, so you mentioned you pulled that from, okay, these are the sellers that are using the information the most. How are they sort of maybe like getting other folks on the team on board? Like, how can you leverage that dream team? Because I think, yeah, that's a great first step, is sort of figure out who should be initially on the team, and then how do you get them to sort of spread the word to get others involved?
No, that's a great question. They really help evangelize competitive intelligence throughout the organization. I really rely on them. I'll sometimes call in favors and be like, hey, when is your next team call? Am I able to join it? Or or are you able to, on your next team call, highlight to all of them that we have these new battle cards, or there's this new asset that's been rolled out throughout the organization. So I really rely on them to further evangelize competitive intelligence, as well as rely on them to provide me with what they're hearing from the field, whether that's new competitors, new tactics that our competitors are using, things of that nature.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so it's going both ways. Yeah, they're giving you insights, you're asking them to spread the word. I love that.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna jump into, and we'll keep, again, going back to questions throughout this whole session. If we don't get to all your questions, we'll send you a note afterwards and respond so that everyone gets questions answered. But I'm going to jump into adoption, which is a common pain point for everyone, where you've developed these insights, build battle cards with everything's relevant intel. You're super excited, and then how do you get sales teams to use these deliverables? So Spencer, I'm going to start with you, because I know you've implemented a lot of great tactics over at Alteryx to get teams using this stuff.
Yeah, so one of the first items when we were digitally transforming our competitive intelligence function was we got our chief product officer, Suresh Vittal, to actually send out a company-wide email with an FAQ sheet and a small video that our team curated on identifying and outlining what our new competitive battle cards are, who they're supposed to be used by, and how anyone in the organization can use it. So first, we had our executive sponsor send out the company-wide email. And then we work hand in hand with our sales enablement and sales operations teams to provide them with the resources, so that when we have new hires and new sellers join our team, Garrett made a really good point. We have some sellers that are very seasoned in our market and in our company, but then we do have new graduates, or just sellers that have come from other vendors that have now joined us. So we worked with our sales enablement teams to improve the new hiring process, so that they can get up and running with our battle cards faster. Because honestly, one of the biggest challenges is just showcasing our sellers where battle cards are and where they can access them. So we try to really reduce that friction when they first join the company.
Yeah, I really like what you mentioned about the CI champion and having that come from the chief product officer. That's gonna hopefully get people a little motivated. And it's such a key point. You need that champion. You need that person that's letting the whole team or company know, like, we're doing this. Get on board. Garrett, anything that you would add in terms of adoption and how you've seen success getting sales teams to, or other teams as well, to adopt battle cards?
Yeah, no, I love the CPO piece as well. And I think getting strong voices, supporting your effort, that's always important. Here's what I'll say. If you're asking this question today and you're on the webinar thinking, how do I get more adoption? It probably comes from a place of adoption is not good enough, which means you've checked and you're not meeting some kind of standard that you had for yourself or somebody had for this program. I would go back to that. So the first thing I would do is get alignment around what is our expectation and goal for engagement with our battle cards. And just make sure that you've communicated that to everybody that's using them. If that's the revenue team, the SE team, the CS team, I would start there. And more often than not, there is a gap around expectation setting that really isn't something like, teams aren't trying to be malicious. They're not trying to ignore your program. They're busy. And so if you're not super clear up front, we want to see weekly engagement with these top 3 battle cards. And if we're not seeing that, we're going to be back in your Monday morning call asking why. That gives them a pretty clear target to shoot for with their behavior, right? Because sales teams, pretty regimented behavior. It's like hit the phones, hit the Zoom, get opportunities to convert. So if you can make this something that slots into that workflow, I think it's a lot easier for them to grok why we're doing this, why it's valuable as a company, and what's expected of them. Then when you see a gap in that data, it's not just adoption feels low. It's more like we set a goal for rep engagement on a weekly basis, and we're at 70% of that. Now we're not solving for adoption is bad. We're solving for going from 70% of our goal to 100% of our goal this quarter or next month, whatever you want that time frame to be. So I would just encourage you, think about this like a strategist and like an owner, because you are the owner of this department. Talk about it that way, and I think you'll get more buy-in with your leadership.
Yeah, it's a really great point to just set some goals at the beginning, especially if you're rolling this stuff out for the first time. And you might just say adoption is 20% of everyone, then we're going to try and get it to 50. And I think that's really helpful reminder to just start with something and kind of like build from there. I'm curious tactically how you get adoption. So I know there's sort of a carrot stick approach with how you're going to get people to look at this stuff. Spencer, I know you, I think, have a kudos board. Like there's something you've created that's definitely more carrot. So can you talk a little bit about that and how that's worked, sort of like the reward system, how that's worked with your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have a internal kudos system at Alteryx. It's called Alteryx All Stars. So anyone in the company can go and give points and kudos to another colleague, whether maybe someone helped someone else on a project or get some deliverable across the finish line. I can go in and reward our top users of our battle cards for obviously using and consuming our battle cards. So on a monthly and quarterly basis, I go in, I identify who our top 10, 15 users of the month were, and then I go in and acknowledge them in this kudos system where I can also tag their manager, and who doesn't like getting praise that their manager also then goes and sees. So we really try to, as you mentioned, use that carrot approach, foster the idea that everyone should be accessing our competitive content and our battle cards, and then just spotlighting everyone's great efforts in consuming that competitive content.
Yeah, I really like that. You guys are trying to make it fun, make it a positive thing. I think that works really well. Anything you've maybe used in the past, Garrett, in terms of tactically how you get folks to use this stuff? I know something we've heard from our customers is, put battle cards where your sellers live. So whether that's Salesforce or Slack, like make it as easily accessible to them as possible. Anything you would kind of just add in terms of, again, like tactically getting people to use this stuff?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. First of all, I think the integrations are key. So in Crayon, one of the things that I see a lot of customers do is use a dedicated Slack channel for Compete. If you don't have one today, definitely create one. Super low effort, super high return. But within that Slack channel, you can start keying off of data within a tool like Crayon, like our leaderboard, to Spencer's point, to call out your power users. And it's not always the person who's engaging the most with the battle card. I think that's one type of power user. but it could also be somebody that's submitting the most field intelligence or employee intelligence back into the platform to help you kind of keep that radar current and up to date. So we hear a lot that adoption suffers when battle cards are not current. They're not updated in real time. They get stale. Then people lose trust and they don't go back to that asset. I think you can kind of cut that off and head that off by having a really robust pipeline of people that are engaging with competitive intelligence as a concept in your company, feeding it back into a tool like Crayon as field intelligence, and then rewarding them by calling that out. And to Spencer's point, if you have a formalized kudos program, it's the perfect place to do it. If not, just start raising your hand on all sales calls. If it's a town hall with your entire selling team and the reps, bosses on the call, that's the perfect time to say this individual has submitted 3 pieces of field intelligence this month, and it's changed the battle card content. We love it. We want to see more. That makes them feel great. It's a free activity, but it also, again, it solves that root problem of outdated content before it becomes an issue.
Yep. Yeah, that's a really great point. Calling people out positively, thank you for participating. Thank you for providing that awesome field intel that now can make our program and our battle cards better. That's really great feedback. Let me switch over to, speaking of feedback, we're going to talk a little bit about creating that effective feedback loop, which we had a question about that earlier. So, we kind of touched upon this, and you both talked about make sure you're joining the sales calls, make sure, you're getting in that regular cadence of, monthly or weekly calls. I don't know, Garrett, if you would add anything to this in terms of gathering feedback, like how often should you be gathering feedback for your battle cards? What's like a good, time frame, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like the optimistic or ideal answer is all the time, right? You should never not have feedback. That's kind of unrealistic for a busy CI or PMM team. So I think the core question here is, how do you know when feedback has failed or broken down? And the answer, again, is usually in adoption. People stop trusting your assets, so they stop viewing your assets, which breaks that habit. And then you see adoption and engagement go off a cliff, right? And that's kind of what you're trying to avoid. So I think to avoid that, you need to be the champion that is joining those sales calls and kind of assigning yourself as like the person that's going to raise a hand and say, here are the engagement numbers that we're seeing. What's driving those? Why are they so good? Or why are we seeing them kind of stagnate and stay the same or start to decline a bit? Because if you don't, those revenue teams are really busy. I've said that a couple of times, but there's rarely a time where the seller raises their hand and says, my engagement has declined 20% quarter over quarter. Not going to happen. You need to be that person. And so I think the more touches you have with your stakeholder groups, whoever they are, it's probably sales leadership and the sales reps, but maybe the sales engineering team or the consultants, maybe the sales enablement team or the customer success team, depending on who you have. I think the more face time you have and opportunities to just raise a hand and ask, the better chance you have to establish a feedback loop that's living and breathing over time and never really stagnates or declines.
Makes sense. Spencer, you kind of, touched upon what you had done with feedback, but maybe like how often, I think you said monthly, is that like typically when you're going to the calls, like how often are you thinking about, I need to gather feedback for these battle cards?
Yeah, it really kind of depends on the competitor. We have a defined list of who our top 10, 15 competitors are. So we obviously are having a much stronger feedback loop on those 10 to 15 competitors. But I always think it's also a great time to get feedback from new hires. So every month we have a new hire boot camp. So we also use that as a feedback loop because it's the first time that these users have even seen our content. And then, as you mentioned, when we're joining those sales leadership calls, we're also getting that feedback loop on those cadences.
Nice. Yeah, get the fresh pair of eyes. I really like that. I like that you've incorporated that into your program. These folks are new. They haven't seen this stuff anymore. What can we kind of learn from them? That's great. Let's pause again and just talk to the folks that are on here. Like what questions do we have, Connor?
Yeah, I got one that I'm excited for you both to dive into. So this is another anonymous attendee, and they're making a really great point, which is that oftentimes sellers think that they know what needs to be on a battle card, and that they often want things like really specific features or pricing, things that you can't necessarily get, and more importantly, things that you don't think are important. And as Denney points out, oftentimes as the leader of the compete program, you know that what they actually know the battle card is different from what they're asking for. So how do you handle that situation? The way this person put it is, how do you manage this when you feel like sellers are asking the wrong questions? How do you reframe their idea of what should be on a battle card?
That's a good one. Garrett, you want to jump in?
For sure. I think this is a really important topic because so much of it is predicated on trust. And a lot of what you do as a product marketer or a CI owner is all predicated on trust. So Connor, what I love about this question is it's kind of saying, I think, or I know that the question is the wrong one to be asking. We could solve the root cause differently or better if we asked a different question. So I think the key here, A, is make sure you have trust with this group or this person. So make sure that you are delivering things that they love and that they have loved in the past. That's number one. If your adoption is high and your engagement's high, you've got a pretty high bank of trust to draw on. But number two is reframe the question around success for them. So if this is a seller, understand why they think there's a problem. And the problem is, at least in my experience, it was usually in one of a couple buckets. Number one is like, I want better data. And a lot of times with selling teams, it's, I want to know their pricing. I want to know the competitor's pricing. Not always a thing you can get or do or equip people with if it's not public, right? Especially when that's private pricing. Your answer is like, sorry, we can't do that, or it's not available, whatever. In that case, reframe the question around where they're feeling that pinch in the sales process. So you're getting pinched around pricing. Is that because we're not doing enough on the battle card to equip you around our value, to justify our pricing, to pull the conversation away from dollars and cents? And then look at your battle card tiles and pages and understand what's working, what's not within that context, rather than getting sucked down a rabbit hole. I think it's so easy, Connor, to the questions point, to really get pulled into every single ask and become an order taker rather than a strategic CI leader, which is really my whole push in this space. Think about up-leveling yourself and empowering yourself to have that strategic conversation.
Nice. Is there anything you would add to that, Spencer, based on your experience?
I mean, I think sellers always want to know what the pricing information is of our competitors, and more often than not, pricing information isn't always available. But I think, to Garrett's point, I think understanding why the seller is asking for that specific type of information helps me understand where they're coming from, and then how we can maybe pivot that question to go after some other information. And I was just speaking with a seller yesterday actually about pricing information, and we didn't have the information on this specific competitor, but what we were able to do was we were able to loop in our value engineers who could arm our seller with more pricing information on our end of how our pricing is a differentiator against competitor A and B. So, actually just getting on the phone, understanding where the seller is coming from and why they're asking those questions can identify and facilitate different avenues that we can go about.
Awesome. What else we got, Connor?
Yeah, on the theme of trust, I think especially for folks who are on a distributed team, folks who work remotely, don't work in the same space as their field teams. One tactic that one of our attendees is asking about are videos. So this person is wondering if either of you ever record videos for your field team. So I think some of the applications here could maybe be like a quick tour of the new battle card, letting them know, hey, here's what this is, here's what this is, or maybe almost presenting the content of the battle card as like a quick video tutorial, and then maybe there's a call to action that says, hey, if you don't want to come back to this video, check out the battle card. Do either of you do anything like that? And if not, do you think there's validity there and maybe some value?
Yeah, so my team has a Microsoft SharePoint website that anyone in the organization can go to get answers to their frequently asked questions, things of that nature. And on that website, we do have less than 5-minute recordings of us accessing the Crayon platform, walking through the format of a battle card, how to access it, and then also the different ways you can engage our team. And then certain select videos also get shared with new hires so that they can get up and running faster. But one of the key things is to keep the videos as short and sweet as possible. We try to have them under 5 minutes. Anything longer, we usually find that the audience just checks out, which is fair because, most of our attention is on other initiatives. So we try to keep it as short and sweet as possible.
That's great. That's a great rule of thumb, under 5 minutes, because no one can watch anything for long periods of time anymore. We're all used to jumping around. Any other questions, Connor, that we can answer?
Yeah, I will. I got one more question that I'll throw there, and I also want to highlight that that Sam Nero is in the chat, and she's adding her 2 cents on videos, saying that that their sellers love video, and they do differentiator videos that highlight info from the battle cards, but also give a framework for specific competitors. So thank you for that, Sam. That's awesome. Yeah, one more question here. So Chad is wondering. This is a good one. He's wondering about the distinction between competitor level battle cards and product specific battle cards. So I think the idea here is that should you have, say you have a competitor where you compete across multiple products, should you have one battle card for that competitor, or should you have a battle card for each of those product lines? So I guess there'll be multiple battle cards for the same competitor. What do you both think there?
Garrett, what do you typically see or recommend or have done in the past?
Yeah, this is such a challenge for a lot of product marketers when you're competing against bigger companies, because they have many product lines around the globe often, and they touch a lot of different parts of your competitive footprint. So here's one way you can solve this with Crayon. I still think your top level battle cards ladder up to the logo. That's really important for a lot of reasons. It kind of gives your seller an easier path to find where they're going and the information they're looking for. But when you think about product, you can either include that under the logo if it makes sense, if it's 3 or 4 sub, tiles within that battle card, that works. If it's a bigger competitor, let's imagine you're competing against a Fortune 10, they're massive. And you might want to start to see if you have similarities across enough competitors to build a topic-based battle card that's more like competing against a CRM solution with links to those individual logos, competing against a cloud-based, database provider, and then links to individual logos. That way you create this like network effect across your platform, across Crayon, where it's got logos on one side, topics, which could be products, general categories on the other, and they kind of matrix and support and feed off of one another. That's one way that I would think about solving this, but I'm guessing it's only more common in those more complex, mature, saturated markets.
Anything you can add, Spencer? How do you maybe break that down how you do that at Alteryx, I should say?
No, I think this is an awesome question because we're actually facing this challenge at the moment. So we actually have similar to Garrett, we call them competitive guides, similar to a topic board. So if you're competing against a specific vertical solution, this is how we would go about them. But then we try to, as much as we can, keep each logo have one universal battle card, because we found that sellers don't always know the actual product of that logo they're competing against. They just know the logo they're competing against. So we want to reduce that customer journey for our sellers in terms of finding that battle card. So we do have that universal battle card, and then within the battle card, you can go to that respective product tile to better understand the differentiators for that specific product line.
I like that. Yeah, that's helpful. All right, let me jump into the next portion here. Let's talk about managing all the content on your battle cards. This is getting like into the weeds a little bit. So I think a lot of companies kind of have this set it and forget it mentality when it comes to battle cards. Garrett, you brought up, you erode some trust there. If people are going back to your battle cards, they're outdated, they're not right, then you're not going to get adoption. So that ties back to, lack of adoption. So how do you both recommend keeping these materials up to date? Do you have a cadence that you set for yourself where you go back and check, or what kind of processes do you think work well for just maintaining the content on these battle cards? And Garrett, I'll kick it off to you there.
Yeah, for sure. I think you need a cadence, first of all. And if you don't have one today, consider building that as maybe one of your fastest actions after this webinar. Just think about how frequently you're asking your revenue team to touch that battle card. You really want to make sure that a couple of weeks don't go by, a chunk of time where they would see outdated information or bad information multiple times and then just stop going to the battle card. That's kind of what the pitfall, right? Like the landmine that you're trying to avoid. I think on the flip side, you need to be in a tool like Crayon monitoring the market. And when you see something that is significant enough, it triggers a one-time action. And so that could be a tier 1 M&A deal that consolidates 2 competitors. You've got to get into those battle cards today, change that, add language around kind of, disengaging with that or beating that conversation in the sales deal. So it's really a balance between cadence on one side that's regular, repeatable, and expected, and then triggers for one-time action when the market demands it.
I like that. Spencer, anything you would add there, and anything that's worked well for you in terms of, just keeping all your battle cards up to date?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to Garrett, if there's some big news announcement that comes with a competitor too that warrants an immediate refresh. We also have, whenever a competitor releases a new product release line, we go in and update the battle card immediately. And then we also use the viewership metrics of the Crayon platform to understand what assets are being accessed the most, or on the flip side, maybe some aren't being accessed at all, and that warrants either to archive them or maybe to double click to see if it's just because the data in there is a little stagnant and it does need a refresh.
All right, some good, helpful best practices there. We're gonna spend the last few minutes just going through some questions from everybody. This is Spencer and Garrett. If you want to connect with them after today's session to ask them further questions about their programs and what they've done around battle cards. And this is just a shout out for our state of competitive intelligence report that we just launched here at Crayon. So yeah, let's spend the last few minutes just going through some additional questions from folks. Connor, over to you.
Yeah, well, let's stick with the content management theme for a minute. So I think when we think about content management, that's not just the information in the battle card, but also the way the information is displayed and formatted. And Brett earlier in the session submitted a great question. He asked, how can battle cards be formatted to optimize reduction of uncertainty in the end user? So I think the other way of saying that is like, do you have any tips for formatting your battle cards, displaying the information in a way that evokes trust? Like, should you lead with certain kinds of intel? Should you lead with, here's your 1-sentence talk track where you ask this question? How do you go about that?
I mean, we obviously partner really closely with Crayon, so our team doesn't try to recreate the wheel of what the format should be. So we really rely on Crayon's input of what are the best practices. But then as I mentioned, we tested against certain sellers, and what we found is what they want at the top is to understand how do we win most often against that competitor. So usually that's the very first tile. How do we win? We used to start off the battle cards with like key takeaways, like what are the things you should need to know. But our sellers came back to us and like, Spencer, honestly, more often than not, we just want to know how do we win. And then the next thing is what are the pitfalls that we should avoid when talking to customers. So we've actually really reversed the format of our battle cards to orient to how our sellers want to consume and position those battle cards with our customers, excuse me.
They just want you to get right to it. How do we win?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Anything you can add to that, Garrett?
I would just say a lot of times these questions come from a place of like, how much content do I include, or how do I format it to make it easy to read? And I do think it's really important. And Spencer, you've touched on this, to like go back to the source. And most revenue teams are not spending half of their week, reviewing these battle cards. It does need to be quick hit. So think about that. Think about it when you structure your information. How do I make something that's really punchy, that sticks with that rep? So I think stats, number one, include as much statistical data as you can. If it's data backed, that's like the best kind of data. Number two is voice of customer. And so you versus a competitor, if you can find customer stories, testimonials, quotes, anything you can pull in through your normal selling motion and then store it in the battle card, that's another great source of information that the rep doesn't have in the back of their mind, right? So they need you. They need that battle card, and it's a great reason to go back to it, to find that again and again and reinforce that pattern of engaging with what, like smack the mic off the screen, engaging with what you're building. So I do think that's really important. Think about who's consuming this and the kind of information that they would use in their selling process.
I like that. Garrett, you're getting really excited about battle card content.
Real excited, real excited.
What other questions do we have, Connor?
Yeah, one person was wondering, so say a salesperson approaches you and they say, hey, I'm locked in this super competitive deal with this one competitor. I'd love to win over the prospect by sending them the battle card so they can see for themselves why we win. What do you do in that situation? Obviously, you're not gonna authorize them to share this battle card with a prospect. So what do you do instead? How do you get to the root cause there?
Yeah, I mean, I think customer facing content is probably our biggest request besides pricing information. And so my team doesn't roll up into product marketing. So we partner very closely with our product marketers to curate some of that customer facing content. But we also volunteer ourselves to join the seller on their customer calls, where we can vocally verbalize how we differentiate against the competitor. But we really try to avoid those feature to feature battles, and we try to showcase the value add that our software and our products can lead to better use cases and outcomes for the customer.
Got it. Anything you can add there, Garrett? Maybe, I don't know if you've been in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, this is really tricky. I think I agree with what Spencer's saying, that pricing and customer facing information is always requested forever. And so it's really tough to solve for that. But I think the core of the issue is, do we have something in this battle card that is powerful enough to win a deal? And the answer should be yes. If you're giving that to a rep to go win that deal, it should be strong enough that you could show it to a customer and also win that deal without that middle person of your selling team. So I think this is an org by org decision. If your org is comfortable with it and you can find a way to make it customer facing, maybe there is stuff in there that you can't share, like customer quotes that are not approved for external use. That's fine. Keep it private, keep it internal. That's just good, sensible business practice. But I think if there's enough information that you're confident putting in front of your revenue team because it should be winning more business, then that's definitely something you could rely on with a customer as well. You should be just as confident putting it in front of them to win that deal there as well. So yeah, I would encourage you, think about that and find a way to make it happen.
All right, good advice. We got a couple minutes left here. Let's get one more. Let's sneak one more in before we wrap up.
Yeah, so I think from our poll, the biggest pain point, the most common pain point folks had was determining what to include in their battle cards. So we have a question in terms of collecting intel. This person's wondering, outside of listening to sales calls and stalking websites, where else do you two like to go to find information that will then make its way back to a battle card?
We do our best to interview all new hires and ask them if there's any publicly available information that they could provide us on certain competitors. We also listen to earnings calls on our competitors that are public. Twitter and LinkedIn are some of the stronger news sources as well. It's a little bit less structured. And then, you have to get a little bit creative, like Reddit and some of the other social media platforms are being used by some more of the startups. So some more of those ad hoc requests, you have to get a little bit creative on the news sources that you leverage. But and then obviously, since we are a customer and partner of Crayon, we leverage Crayon's digital foot tracking engine as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Spencer. So we're right at, or almost at the top of the hour. I just want to thank both Spencer and Garrett for participating. We got some great information on what you guys are doing successfully for Battlecards. If we didn't get to your question, like I said, we'll follow up so that everyone gets a response. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming today and listening to us talk about Battlecards.